The content herein is for informational purposes only, not intended as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and is not to be substituted for direct advice from your doctor.
Today's LymphCast program is proudly sponsored by VitaSupport MD, the makers of Vein Formula 1000 and Lymphatic Formula 1000. These MPFF-based nutraceuticals are backed by science and recommended by doctors specializing in venous and lymphatic disorders. Visit VitaSupportMD.com to learn more.
Welcome to LymphCast, the show that brings together doctors, other health professionals, and special guests to discuss lymphedema, venous disease, and other associated disorders, and what can be done if this is affecting your life. Now it's time to sit back, relax, as it's time to learn all about lymphedema, venous disease, and associated disorders on our show, LymphCast. Greetings and welcome to LymphCast, episode 23. Glad you're with us. Let's go ahead right away and meet the panel and get into tonight's discussion. From California, Dr. Emily Iker. Greetings, Dr. Iker. How are you today?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, wonderful team. And we are so excited to hear Andy about his project. We know Andy for quite some time, and you are one brilliant man. So what a joy and honor to have you here today.
All right, very good. From New York, used to work at Dr. Chuback's office, RVT, Jacqueline Sasick. Hi there, Jacqueline. How are you today?
Hi, Paul. Doing good. Happy to be here.
All right. From Minnesota, Dr. Mark Melin. Hello, Dr. Melin. How are you today, sir?
Good to see you, Paul. Thank you.
If you don't mind, before I introduce John Chuback, there's a painting behind you I've not seen before. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Well, I want you to first see the artist's name is Monika Gloviczki, who could not join us today. So I want to make sure that she was represented, and it's from Peter Ginz's Dream. It's a book that was written posthumously after he had passed away in Auschwitz, and his sister resurrected his diary. And Monika really put together a great painting, a couple paintings actually out of this. And so it's just, I thought it was a beautiful piece of work and a great way to represent Monika today.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll come right back to you, Dr. Melin, to introduce our special guest. But first, the founder of this show, also the founder and owner of VitaSupport MD, makers of Vein Formula 1000 and Lymphatic Formula 1000, from New Jersey, physician surgeon Dr. John A. Chuback. Hello, Dr. Chuback. How are you, sir?
Hi, Paul. I'm doing great. Good to see you again. I hope all is well with you. We missed you on one episode. I did a poor job trying to fill in those big shoes, but I did what I could under the circumstances. Looking forward to today's show. Thank you.
Well, if it happens again, I'll send you my microphone. That way Andy will be impressed and you'll do a better job. How's that sound?
Well, if nothing else, I can hide behind it.
That's right. All right, Dr. Mark Melin, back to you, sir, if you want to bring in our special guest, and we'll get rolling.
So I'll make this a brief introduction because we're going to talk about Andy's the entirety of his career. But again, as Emily had alluded to, a brilliant engineer, and I called him in the introduction an engineer's engineer, which is about the highest compliment I think I could pay. Recently, there was an article that came about how he started Koya, and it's this great story about his love for his father, and about how he was just looking for another solution to treat lymphedema. And so I think we're going to go all the way from the start of your career, Andy, to how you ended up working with your collaborative team and how you developed Koya in this really tremendous non-pneumatic, truly ambulatory MLD-like device that is really having some remarkable outcomes and some high-profile, high-impact journal publications. So let's start back in eye health and where your career started.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And Emily, good to see you again. John and Jacqueline, nice to meet you as well. And thanks for having me. I think it's a pleasure to be here, tell you a little bit about the history, and also give you a reflection of where we are and where we're headed as a team. But it all started across the planet. Halfway across the planet, I was born in India, and the southern part of India, and grew up there. Born to a civil engineer who built the Indian Railways, a critical part, and a mother who was a historian. a great upbringing, and so science was sort of in the family growing up, right? I think the language we speak beyond our native tongue and a few other languages is the language of science. So I think that was very much since the early formative years. So I would say I'm not an engineer's engineer. I'm probably nobody's engineer, but I am a scientist at heart, and I trained as a scientist. So I went to school for chemical engineering, and then subsequently with a focus in material science and biomaterials. My sister's a physician, so I think it's in the family, as I said, and was fortunate to go to some great schools for the early training, which was in biomedical engineering. So it's really more of, as I mentioned, more of biomedical than it is engineering. It gives you a great sense of how our body works, the physiology, the anatomy, disease states, what can you do about it, right? How do we improve health? So great training at UNC Chapel Hill. Took a break. I went climbed some mountains across the world, rode a motorcycle here and there, and then came back. And I was very fortunate. I was in my mid-20s. I was very fortunate to have a chance to work with a phenomenal team and investors working on an intraocular lens. So back in the day, you all may know this, you're in healthcare, you're physicians, but intraocular lens is a replacement device which is artificially made to treat cataract. So as we age, the natural protein in the eye, the crystalline lens, will essentially solidify and become opaque. So it's like seeing through a waterfalls or a cataract. That's why it's called cataract, right? Everything it slowly gets blurry. You lose your vision over time. In developed countries like ours, this is a 2-minute surgery, and you're back to complete spectacle independence. In places that are less fortunate, where there are socioeconomic disparities, these folks go blind, right? And become a burden to themselves and society. So I was very fortunate that my first chance was to innovate in intraocular lenses. And this was done with essentially a hydrophobic acrylic, going back to the biomaterials route, to design a lens that can go through a very small incision. So it goes through a sub 2.4 millimeter incision, which is self-healing, the wound is, and happens very quickly. So it goes in like a taco, and within the eye, it opens up in the capsular bag, right? Within a few minutes, spectacle independence. That's how amazing the technology is, right? Sight enabling, life enabling, really, that's what it was. So I started off as an inventor, a scientist, and then quickly realized I enjoyed the translation aspect of bringing it to fruition through the manufacturing, through clinical, through all the necessary steps of education, commercialization. And this was all in Santa Barbara in Central California. That's where I was based, and thoroughly enjoyed that, right? I was there for a good long while and built that team. It is currently under Bausch & Lomb, the lens for the US, and over 6 million folks have been treated with that lens. So really, the power of an idea is really beyond us in a way. So I think that's something I thoroughly enjoyed. I moved to the Bay Area and then subsequently worked on another eye technology, which is currently with Allergan Pharmaceuticals. And then Koya began, which is something I would love to share more with you, Mark.
It's remarkable to touch this 6 million lives, but Andy, it's touching how many families as well. Because when you pointed out to lose your independence, it has such an impact on family as well. And I think that's really a good segue and a pivot into when you walked into the room that day when your dad, was on getting treatment for lymphedema and the genesis of the idea. So yes, we're very looking forward to hearing this transition.
My dad ended up with prostatic cancer pretty much a week after he retired. So he was, I think, early 70s. And like a very stereotypical Indian dad from that time, would work his entire life to provide for his kids, to give them a better shot, right? So within a week, prostatic cancer, the three of us, I think, were quite concerned. and looked through what's going on. So he ended up getting surgery, and the cancer is in remission, fortunately. But one thing they didn't tell us is that the risk of lymphedema. So his lower extremity started swelling. They removed a bunch of nodes. And as I was talking to my sister, she's a hem-onc specialist, and she was saying, yeah, we see this all the time with our patients in a very casual way, right? So that sort of sparked in my head, what is this? Lymphedema, I don't understand. So let's go find out more. And it's essentially pinged a lot of folks. Like there's a gentleman, Dr. Roxon, Stanley Roxon. He was one of the first folks I talked to, along with Dr. Jane Armour. And they took the call. So it began the journey for Koya in many ways. And I learned a ton, and then since still learning. It's amazing how interconnected it is to our cardiovascular system. I mean, this is the LymphCast podcast, so I'm not going to necessarily geek out on the lymphatics, but coming in new from Iker, the importance of the lymph system and how critical it is for your immune response, as well as your broad metabolic health. And Mark, you and I have talked about this for aging, right? How critical it is, how that relates to the venous system, how these two interplay. It's a primordial vascular system, right? Without an active pump like the cardiomyocytes have evolved. Mm-hmm. So to me, I'm telling you some of the early learnings I had. Hopefully this makes sense to you. But as I looked at it, it looked like a vein that had its own valve, the lymphangion, for the contraction, but it was contracting through the smooth muscle cells that was around it, right? The muscle around it. Hence, we've evolved as a species to move, to have muscle for that purpose, really, beyond the weight carrying. In fact, the other thing that Mark and I have become close friends in this is he's got a space thing, and behind him, he and I talk about space a lot. Where else can human beings, as we see the future, where do they go? And for that, you need gravity. Gravity is a very important thing for the evolution of muscle and lymph movement. So I was really learning all this and realized that the state in which cancer survivors are left with removal of the nodes, impairing the nodes, of course, you've got to remove the cancerous tissue. But they're left with this condition that's lifelong.
And Andy, expand on, there are many patients that watch this podcast as well. So if we look at the extent of what we would call secondary lymphedema, so you've had cancer, have surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and then subsequently develop lymphedema, that affects a broad swath of our population in the United States, if not worldwide.
It really does. In fact, this is also something we've touched upon privately before, is a very important topic, which is you've coined, along with others, the aspect of chronic edema, right? So when we think of the skin, the interstitium, it's really collectively all one network. It may look chaotic to us, but the body knows, and it's organized itself in a phenomenal way. So when we think of impairment of flow to these circuits, elements, macromolecules, essentially proteins that need cleared, if they don't get cleared, they can accumulate anywhere and everywhere. So that accumulation crudely is what edema is, right? It swells for a reason. When we get hurt, when we have trauma, same phenomenon essentially, right? It's the lymphocyte that comes and starts the whole immune response. These are things we know, right? We've been trained on this, everybody knows about this, but no one really connects the dot necessarily to understand it's all one continuum in a way of cascade of responses. So cancer, in the case of cancer's treatment, whether it's surgery, radiation, or chemo, you're destroying that zone, the part that is affected correctly, right? So anything in the vicinity, whether it's the circulatory system of the venous or the lymphatic, will take a hit. And hence, you'll have downstream events, and that cannot be resolved. The body is not going to heal at that level. Right. And the second aspect, which you talk about across the board for the broader population as we all age, is venous. Right. And one of the things, learnings for me as a scientist and looking at it from a circulatory system is, as simple as this sounds, the heart is really a pump but a pump in such a way that it pushes, doesn't necessarily pull as effectively, right? It's the contraction that happens, so it pushes. That's why the pressure is high on the arterial side. And as it returns through the cellular exchange back through the venous system, it is relying, especially from the lower extremity, on the pumping action from the calf and the muscle, right? That's why we need to move. That's why exercise is important. And these returns are important. That's why the veins have valves. So it gushes through and then it closes. And then again, it gushes through these gates that are formed because the heart is not, quite frankly, an effective pump. So when the venous system takes a hit through aging, through diet, through various comorbidities, right? Obesity, diabetes, then that too suffers. Blood likes to flow, as my sister likes to say. It doesn't like to stop. So it likes high shear force. It likes to keep moving. The moment it stops or it comes in contact with subcollagen, then the cascade begins of essentially thrombosis, right? And that creates its own cascade. And then you're dealing with post-thrombotic syndrome after you remove it, where the endothelium is disrupted. Something Mark and I thought is the glycocalyx and the importance of that, right? So all this is the continuum of what happens for the disease state, right? Whether it's lymphatic or venous, is the lens in which I am building Koya, right? So I'm really passionate about this, partly because I'm looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, no pun intended.
Well, it's really interesting because I'm going to connect the dots here. You brought up Heather Hattrick's, who now she just got married last week, as you all know. So Heather Barnhart, but she coined this phrase VAIL, V-A-I-L, which is veins, arteries, integument. So integument would be skin, fascia, bone, everything else, and then lymphatics. And then you've really touched on something John just had at the American Venous Lymphatic Society as a poster about comparing, as a cardiovascular surgeon, congestive heart failure, and then he coined the term cleft, C-L-E-F. So congestive leg edema, or congestive leg lower extremity failure. Thank you, John. Congestive lower extremity failure. And I think it's a brilliant thought, and you just enunciated it in such a great fashion, Andy, because ultimately, what are the things that can help as we age to help keep the veil tight, so that biotensegrity, because there's a certain predetermined tension between tissues that maintains homeostasis. Gravity over years has an impact on disrupting much of that homeostasis, as well as breakdown of tissues, trauma, injury, etc. And so what I hear you talking about is almost a aging well therapeutic, because the goal isn't to live forever, but the goal is to live as healthy as possible until your last day.
Vein Formula 1000 and Lymphatic Formula 1000 from VitaSupport MD are backed by science and sold in doctors' offices. If you're a physician who may be interested in prescribing or selling these excellent nutraceuticals, please call 862-246-7877 to speak to a representative today.
So what are those therapies, and what are those things that we can talk about? Because I see big links between what you and John are both on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, it's you only live once, right? And you have one body. In fact, there's, I think, an ancient Chinese proverb that says you actually live twice. The second time is when you realize you only live once, right? But I think you have one body, right? So yes, it's about our patients. This the idea for Koya, for example, sparked from my own experience with my dad's case, but it's evolved since then, right? The team has grown and the ideas have grown, and we're learning more. So it's not just about our patients in lymphatics and those that are, cancer survivors or chronic venous disease. It's about all of us that are talking here. It's about you. It's about me. It's about our body, right? As we age, even though we assume we won't, the gray hairs will start to appear slowly, and we will age. So the most important thing is, how can we age well and be as healthy as we can be? I think for that, I think from our standpoint, movement is key. One needs to be moving. Muscle mass is key. It's very key, I think, especially as we age, for osteoporosis and drop risks. Very important. But most importantly is your cardiovascular system and your venous system. especially a venous system, since it hasn't really deserved or hasn't really received the attention. It deserves a lot of attention. Arterial usually gets a lot of attention, right? But venous is way more prevalent, as you all know. So I think chronic venous disease and lymphatic disease is where my head is at. That is Koya's mission, is to transform venous and lymphatic. You know, when I began this company, this was named after a Japanese mountain. It's a Buddhist monastery, and it talks about being whole and being centered, right? So the hope here is also, as we build this, we're starting with one approach for home health with the device you described. I'm happy to go into how that came about, but that is just the starting point. We want to be able to diagnose better, intervene better, offer more solutions, because there, quite frankly, isn't as much as we need.
So go into the development of the device that you are speaking of. We'd love, how did it go from benchtop to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I think it probably will take its own podcast to understand how that works. But just maybe simplifying it, distilling it, it always starts with a thought, right? And the thought needs to be one that is nurturing the questions that you ask. So in my case, my dad was prescribed one of the pumps that's out there, right? When I asked Stan what else is out there, he said, well, compression garments and pumps. I said, there's got to be more. You can't just tell me 2. He said, well, sorry, Andy, there's only 2 right now. So that alone was a starting point for me to say, I mean, we really need to shed a light on this and do something here. So as you all know, the compression garments, the way they work is they provide static compression for upper or lower, essentially to provide some external pressure for the lymph or the venous buildup to clear, right? To offer some external assist. Pump does it by one more step, which is, for those that may not know what a pump is, it's a pneumatic compression device, or essentially a CPAP-like machine that generates air and inflates and deflates into chambers to, once again, provide sequential pressure to slowly clear the buildup of protein and essentially lymphedema, right? So that happens over time, and you have to use it every day, once a day. So when I bought my dad one of these things, he was intimidated at first. He said, I'm not going to use this. I'm not that old yet, is what he said. So it sparked an idea. If he's not going to use it, and he's a pretty active guy, question is there a broader need for those that need care, but just aren't engaging with solutions, given there aren't as many solutions? So that gave birth to saying, yes, there is something to be done here, right? This is a problem worth solving. And, you know, given my previous experience in building teams, building the right people with the right technology, you know, we wanted to rinse and repeat that here. Very new in the venous and lymphatic space, but we've learned a lot, especially looking at it from fresh set of eyes, and no questions are dumb questions, right? So you learn a lot. And that gave birth to essentially a compression device that offers both static and minimally static when you don it, upper and lower, and also provides the active without needing air. And so you may wonder, how does that do that? So it's actually one of the world's first inventions for using shape memory alloy for actuation. So essentially, shape memory alloy is nitinol, and the same material that is used for cardiac stents or a variety of interventional applications. And the reason they do that is it remembers its shape. You can go through small incisions. And in this case, we're using it in a wearable device and using it to shrink and expand the skin and hence the tissue and offer the pressure that is appropriate in a sequential manner, controlled through an electronic controller system that is the size of your phone, weighs not much, and you can put it in your pocket and off you go, right? So that's the idea, is to bridge the static active learnings from the past that others have taught us and open up a new category of solutions that patients can get access to.
So this could be potentially applicable to, obviously, lymphedema, because you've already got a really good study published on upper extremity from Jane Armour's database. You just had a publication in Nature. which is that's a high impact article to be in Nature. And then obviously, have you had experience with women with lipedema, one of Emily's areas of expertise? Because this is a vastly underdiagnosed population, undertreated population who are just looking for options.
Yeah, no, great question. It's only been, we've only been in the Koya's only been around for 3-4 years now, so still early in our journey, very early. But to your point, we are ultimately our DNA is from a science standpoint, the outlook we have. So we have completed a lot of clinical studies, 7, and published them, and we're running more studies to really educate ourselves, educate the audience, the users, and see what type of folks it'll help and what else can we do, right? It is informative in that sense. So the study that Mark is referring to is a study that was a randomized controlled trial, which we ran for breast cancer survivors with lymphedema, upper extremity, comparing against some of the gold standards that are out there today. And we're happy to report we had fantastic outcome in terms of reduction, but more importantly, also usage. If you don't use it, you won't get the benefit. So engagement is key, especially if you're at home relying our patients to take care of themselves before as clinicians we see them. It's important they do that. So I think anything we can do to take the friction out of that would obviously help. So the device is able to record remotely the adherence side too. So we're proud of what we've done there on the upper extremity side. We've done a few more studies on imaging that Emily is familiar with too, the ICG side of things. And then we're now building a lot of evidence on the lower extremity side and looking at phlebo lymphedema, chronic venous insufficiency. The Nature article you're referring to was one of those for the lower extremity. Lipedema is a great unmet need too. We'll need to look into that, as well as phlebo lymphedema. As everyone knows, it's great prevalence of that, and it leads through the SEEP score to some very irreversible conditions.
And just to clarify, this does not replace the need for standard compression.
No, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, if anything, you need a lot of solutions for this, right? The number of solutions that are out there is very limited. So in terms of static compression, I think that'll have a place. Every patient of yours hopefully is using it. We should all be using it, right? And in terms of active combined with this, which is what DaySpring offers, I think that is a 1 hour a day device usage. So this isn't an all-day use case.
So let me ask you kind of a far-reaching question here. It's going to be a little bit off topic, but I saw a number of people in clinic today with diabetic foot ulcers. And Andy, they all have significant lower extremity edema. So we know there's a lymphedema component of diabetes. And it's because of again, back to that vascular hyperpermeability component. Their hyperglycemia results in endothelial cell dysfunction. They shed some of their glycocalyx. We need new solutions for dealing with this lymphedema of diabetes that could potentially improve and decrease limb amputation. So I'm taking you into a conversation that is totally not FDA approved. It's not something we're looking at, covered. But when we get back into that veil concept, anything we can do to reduce edema, and of course, every time people start talking about compression in diabetics, everybody gets very, very concerned. And we have to start thinking of differentiating. You already pointed this out: static, and then what's the level of the static versus a stimulatory dermal lymphatic stimulation. So more of a dynamic. And once you involve the walking, that gets back into this whole certified lymphedema therapist are always talking about that complete decongestive physiotherapy. So when you walk, you're using diaphragmatic breathing, core musculature, all the things that promote motion out of the leg. So, I mean, I think maybe I'm just kind of planting a little seed that maybe there's a future for a technology that may help us decrease limb amputation for our most vulnerable patients in the future.
I like the way you think, Mark. you're always thinking outside the box. And, I think part of the important learning that I've had is it's not one thing, right? I think the body is a continuum. And I think it's very easy for us to put it in buckets saying, this is this and that is that. But there's continuous exchange of information and material throughout. So to me, what you're saying makes a ton of sense. I don't see why it wouldn't work. Broadly speaking, when you bring up diabetes, it's been shown that intermittent fasting and what you put in your body and when and how much can reverse it for type 2, right? We all know that. So that is just essentially the load that your body takes in. So the way I see it as a scientist is three aspects: is what do you put in to the system, right? That's one, that's input basically. So if you can calibrate input, it'll make a difference. So what you eat is very, very important, right? And how often you eat, when you eat, all of that. They haven't really nailed it down, but I think they will. I think the next decade or so, I think we'll nail that as a community. Part two of that equation is how do you keep this internal system, right? Mobility, movement, exercise, very important, very, very important, right? So you can't stress on that enough. So that is the second aspect of it. The third aspect of it is general health and what can you do to ensure if it's an acute situation, you immediately deal with it. And if it is chronic, then you make sure it doesn't flare up. And you're sort of balancing between the input and output there to really get into homeostasis to the extent you can. And for that, the technologies and innovation in general, the way we're looking at it at Koya is how do we enable that, right? How do we enable movement for something that doesn't disrupt, that's something that doesn't require you to sit down or get into a habit forming that is not helping with your broad circulatory system. So I think that's generally how we see things as practical, usable, which is one solution to the broader solutions that are necessary.
At VitaSupport MD, we believe in creating the best bioflavonoid-based supplements to support your vitality. Bioflavonoids are found in abundance in nature and support excellent health and wellness. The demands and stresses being put on our bodies in these challenging times are unlike any we have seen before. Support your body with the flavonoids it needs to fight inflammation and oxidation. Unlike other products in the marketplace, VitaSupport MD dietary supplements use micronized flavonoids for optimal absorption and effectiveness. Micronization is an advanced process which creates an ultra-fine powder easily absorbed by the body. At VitaSupport MD, we are passionate about making your good health our life's work.
You were amazing with all the description. In Jean-Paul Belgrado showed the proportion of the lymph collectors with indocyanide green when using the pump, which is fantastic to see. Before it was thought, oh, the pumps were not good, they don't do anything. And so now we know the pumps are very good and we have very beneficial effect after appropriate treatment. And in our setting, we combine manual lymph drainage and then we use the pumps. And of course, they are used in our setting for half an hour only, but 1 hour a day is just sufficient enough to maintain once we are on the maintenance level in volume reduction. In terms of lipedema, at the ISL, Dr. Marina, an Italian scientist, showed that there is a fluid component in the lipedema. And in lipedema, I use the pumps in lipedema as well, and we have very good efficacy with the pump treatment. And if you are looking for a clinical setup, you are welcome to visit me in Santa Monica, finally. And
Thank you, Emily.
I'll show you, interestingly, before decades ago, I used to see a lot of upper extremity lymphedema patients. And now it reversed. I see more lipedema patients than lymphedema patients. But the challenging part is, as you mentioned, is prostate cancer patients, because after adenectomy and in many instances by removal of 30, 40 lymph nodes, you end up not only with the genital swelling, but also lower extremity swelling. And one has to be careful how to apply the pump treatment when we have the genital swelling and so on. But yes, I see a lot now urological cancer patients after surgical intervention and radiation treatments with residual lymphedema. And the key is just like everything else. The early diagnosis, early treatment gives you better results. So in terms of lipedema patients, yes, we see a lot now. More, I would say, about 55% lipedema patients, and the rest is lymphedema. Another challenging aspect is lymphedema of the face and neck, and I see a lot. So I think that there is a food for the thought, where you can start thinking of something to stimulate also facial lymphedema and the neck lymphedema.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for the comments. I agree with you. I think I'd love to collaborate with you. I think we're overdue for a catch-up. I'd love to come down and spend an afternoon with you. But we'll continue to innovate and get the feedback. I think we're just getting started, as I said. So thank you for the feedback.
Sure.
Well, I would certainly say congratulations on some amazing, amazing work. Fascinating stuff. As a cardiac surgeon, I'm very much familiar with nitinol, because it's one of the materials that helped to destroy my beloved field of open heart surgery and triple and quadruple bypasses, because those damn stents work so well in retaking their form after being passed through a microcatheter, and then having the capacity to remember their shape, so to speak, and to open and keep blocked coronary arteries open at such a tiny scale at the 1 and 2 millimeter and 3 millimeter level, which at one point we thought that materials engineering was not going to be able to solve that problem, that maybe for larger vessels, iliacs and aortas and femorals, it would be possible. But we cardiac surgeons, open heart guys, were always hoping that no such material would come along. Now, of course, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, because it's been a great thing for the human race and for the advancement of the treatment of cardiovascular disease. So I think it was a brilliant stroke on your part to think of nitinol. My question for you, Andy, two-part question. One is, do you have any any example of what this product might look like? Because it's a little bit difficult for me to envision exactly what you're describing in terms of the material and how nitinol is incorporated into it. And part B to the question would be, how are you coping with the financial strains and cost of using nitinol? Because my impression has always been that nitinol is one of these space-aged materials that is quite expensive, but I may be wrong about that.
No, both questions are great questions. One, I think, nitinol, I think it has made its impact, has it not, on medical devices, right, and healthcare in general. I think the human being now is probably 10% nitinol beyond carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, I think. But in all seriousness, I think regarding the first question, I think it is expensive, right? It is an expensive material, but we have a team of some of the most brilliant engineers in the world, and that's not really hyperbolic. We've been very careful in building Koya, and these folks have great experience in manufacturing, software, mechanical, electrical, folks we've worked with before to innovate in other areas. And so they've come together. Now the team's grown into nearly 50 folks at Koya now. Emily, I know when we last spoke, it was a handful of us, but we have a commercial team, we have a clinical market access team, a commercial operations and manufacturing. So through the collective experiences, how I would say we're able to make this in a way that works, right? Economically, financially. Again, it's not easy as a startup. It's challenging, right? Especially in a turbulent environment like this with global supply chain and all that. But fortunately, through the experience, through the team's brilliance, we've been able to navigate through that, innovate and build. And we're currently a commercial stage company, and we're national now. As far as the example of the product, if you go to koyamedical.com, that's KOYA medical.com, there are animations, videos, photographs on how this works, etc. We obviously won't be able to go into trade secrets, but at a high level, nitinol is actuated to float between two states, right? The shrunken state and the expanded state. And that is weaved into the garment itself, lower or upper, through essentially electrical connections is what happens. So we've built it, we've tested it through the FDA requirements. The product is obviously FDA cleared, but that's how it works.
That's fascinating. I would love to talk to you about that whole process. As a founder of a nutraceutical company, I can only imagine on a project like that with such technology being involved in a 50-person team. I assume you had funding through venture capital, private equity, something along those lines.
Correct. So this is a venture-backed company. We've got two wonderful folks who we've known in the past who are healthcare investors, leading healthcare investors in our world, been responsible for a lot of amazing breakthroughs. One of them is Arboretum, and the other one is 3x5 Partners. Now, 3x5 is especially not only a healthcare investor, but also in the climate change. So these are folks that are really transformative when it comes to health and how we live on this habitat, right? I think so. More importantly for us, we raised venture money through these two leads and some others that have backed us, and continue to build Koya till the mission is fulfilled.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm going to just every show I seem to say I shouldn't talk about politics, but then so it's not a political statement really, because again, the word politics is from the Greek, poly meaning many, ticks meaning voracious bloodsuckers. That's something else. But we have so much in the popular press and mainstream media every day, inundating the airways, trying to convince people that capitalism is bad and money is bad and people with money are bad and so forth. That tends to be a very common theme, but I like to point out in our program from time to time when we have moments like this, that without VC people like the ones that you're working with, so many of the great innovations in medicine and healthcare and beyond that drive a society to be greater, with the end result being an improved quality of life for the individual. Without that, the governments could never fund all of these things, not only from a financial point of view, but it's just too complex. There are too many brilliant people like yourself with ideas and innovations and so forth. So I think that it's important to recognize from time to time that these venture projects, although someone may make money at some point and may make a lot of money at some point, as you know, people also lose a lot of money in these projects. And without them, these kinds of innovations, I think, would be largely impossible.
Vein Formula 1000 and Lymphatic Formula 1000 from VitaSupport MD are backed by science and sold in doctors' offices. If you're a physician who may be interested in prescribing or selling these excellent nutraceuticals, please call 862-246-7877 to speak to a representative today.
Correct. I think it's also another loaded topic, which requires more time. But if you were to simplify it, I would say you can't generalize it like anything, right? Like any field, you can't generalize. You can't say all clinicians are great and no one does any harm. I think you cannot say that everybody does harm. So I think, and similarly in the venture side, or when it comes to innovation, it's not all rosy. It's not all bad. I think you need to strike the right balance for the right need, right? I think in terms of the most important thing, I think if you were to take a step back on what you're asking, which is value, is what is valuable, right? I think as a species, as a human being, I think what is of value is the time that you have and the experience you have within that time, right? No matter who you are, that is all you really have. So how you can enable that, to me, that's the lens in which I see the world, is how do we enable it for ourselves and our fellow human beings? And that is fundamental, right? It's table stakes. If you're not healthy, and if you happen to encounter a disease as you age, then that essentially diminishes your experience and your time. So if there's a way we can enhance that, then that is value to society. What that value is, it depends on so many dynamics, right? We cannot generalize it. The venture, I think the whole venture system has enabled so many innovations, right? Including the modality in which we're talking today. Me sitting in California today and you're in New York, that is a pretty amazing thing. We all grew up in the rotary phone thing. So I think there are so many aspects of our lives we can attribute to innovation. And we have to leave the jungle and start bushwhacking for the learning, for our own life experience, and most importantly, for our health. If not this, then the next step doesn't begin.
Absolutely. Well, as you pointed out, this technology that we're using now, when we were children, was considered science fiction and beyond the scope of just about anybody's imagination as manifesting as a reality at some point. But then there are the dreamers, there are the visionaries who bring these visions into the physical realm, which I think is quite amazing. The other thing that I would mention, again, I see such great synergy between our two companies and our two products. I think that the mechanical component that you're talking about is so innovative and fascinating. I want to learn more about it. And it, combined with MPFF, the micronized purified flavonoid fraction, working systemically to decrease inflammation and to promote venous tone and lymphangian contractility and decrease permeability. These things go hand in hand beautifully. And I think you pointed out earlier with one of Mark's questions regarding wounds. And by the way, Mark, this is the first note that I jotted down, what role this Koya device might play in wound healing. And it's so amazing because I saw a patient today with a diabetic foot ulcer and a very swollen limb that I put in compression, which is a very, very tricky subject, as you know, in a diabetic with a foot ulcer. But to Andy's point, none of these modalities is going to be a standalone silver bullet magic cure. All of modern healthcare is multimodality, and everyone at the quote unquote table this evening is going to have a role in that. The compression devices of various forms, various technologies, the surgeon, the medical doctor with hands-on therapy and advice and nutritional advice, dietary supplementation, weight loss, exercise, movement, motion. These are complex problems with complex solutions. And this is where the art of medicine also meets the science of medicine. And again, I think there are people out there who probably foolishly believe that the artistry of medicine will one day be put to rest, and science will answer all of the questions, because eventually it takes a certain gestalt and a certain finesse and touch from physician to physician and patient to patient, then to finally determine how to administer all of these many tools and growing number of tools that we have in our toolbox in such a way that it optimizes the patient outcome and quality of life and that experience in the time that each of us has, as you said.
Correct. I think maybe if I can add to that, I think one aspect is it's a collective effort, right? The collective effort from the patient being the core of it, because they are the one that is going through it. Even if you and I empathize with it, still not the same as living it, right? So it starts there. Then within that circle of the immediate caregivers, their family, therapist, nurse, physicians like yourself, that one of the greatest trust I was reading among human beings, one of them is a physician, because it is you're putting your life in their hands. So I think it's a very beautiful thing. And then comes, I think the layer develops from the learning. If that ecosystem understands that this isn't a binary situation where it takes the knowledge that you learn, the art of inquiry, which is really what science is. Science isn't some equation that we write and hope we have solved an equation or read a couple of books. That's not science. Science is the continuous aspect of learning this world and who we are, and really getting to the bottom of that. And I don't think we'll ever, there's a natural, I think, aspect of not x-axis will never meet. But the more important thing is, how do we do that? And the answer is it's a collective effort where we have to keep asking the questions, learn, relearn, innovate. And for that, I think, honestly, it takes the entire ecosystem to resonate together. Mark, what do you think?
You've hit on the totality of human nature and characteristics and what it's going to take to thrive. And I think the other big component is resilience. And having the wherewithal, the mindset, and then the tools to be able to bounce back. I look at your dad, and ability to bounce back is based on that resilience component. So that comes from family, that comes from love, that comes from being surrounded by a community. And you need a lot of support. And those supports also need to be based in advancing technologies. And it's just, again, where I want to congratulate you, because this advancing technologies in this manner opens up people's lives to both adherence. I shy away from the word compliance. We have to make things that are adherent, that the person can fit into their lives. And then it literally liberates them. And the more liberation they get to participate back in a full quality of life, the more it's just a positive upward circle. We're always talking about the negative downward spiral. And so I think this whole conversation hits on a really positivity that moves us forward, that is starting to apply to a bigger and bigger swath of our demographic in the United States.
Well said.
Now, I would add one thing, Andy. I think I like when you said we have to learn and relearn. And I couldn't agree with you more, but there's one other caveat that I picked up a while back from a mentor of mine who said, we have to learn, and in many cases, unlearn and relearn, because the old saying goes, it ain't what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know that ain't so that hurts you. And so we have to be very cautious about myths and fallacies and half-truths and untruths that we've learned in our academic training, which over time pan out to be false, which is a normal part of learning. But it's one of the things that's difficult for us as learners. I won't say educated people, because no one is fully educated, but we're learning. One of the most difficult aspects of that process is to give up some of the beliefs that we've had once we see enough evidence to show that those are no longer valid ideas and concepts.
Before we go, Dr. Chuback, do we want to bring Jacqueline Sasek in if she has any questions or comments?
Why don't you invite her, Paul?
Jacqueline, step up to the plate. Any questions for our guest?
I did have a question for Andy. For the patients listening and that are interested in the device, what can they do? Do they need a prescription from their doctor or something they get online?
Yes, that is correct. So this is a prescription device. And if you're interested, if you'd like to learn more, just send us an email, contact us via koyamedical.com. So info@koyamedical.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you, or call us, and we'll walk you through the process.
It is available at this time for commercial use.
That is correct. Yes. In selective states, it is. So if you're interested, just call us. We'll let you know if we're there or not. Soon we'll be there everywhere.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Let's go around and thank everybody personally from Minnesota. Dr. Mark Melin. Dr. Melin, thank you for everything tonight.
Well, thank you. Andy, I know you've had a long travel day, so I just want to thank you for spending the end of your day with us and highlighting the important, having intellectual curiosity, right? And that's what's really driven you to this point. So thank you for leading the way for all of us.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. And thank you very much, Andy. Also from California, Dr. Emily Iker. Thank you, Dr. Iker, for everything.
Thank you, wonderful team. Another great session.
All right. And from New York, RVT, Jacqueline Sasek. Thank you, Jacqueline, for everything.
Thank you, Paul. Another great session. Thank
Absolutely. You. And the founder of this show, also the owner-founder of Vital Support MD, makers of Vein Formula 1000, Lymphatic Formula 1000, physician surgeon from New Jersey, Dr. John A. Chuback. Thank you, Dr. Chuback, for everything you've done, you continue to do, and of course, for everything on this show.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andy, especially this evening. Great program. As always, I certainly learned more than I had to share. It's one of the wonderful byproducts of having put this program together. And I look very much forward to learning more about the Koya device and devices, and hopefully being able to incorporate them into my practice for my patients.
All right, very good. And that brings to conclusion our LymphCast show, episode 23. Thank you for listening, watching, or both. And we'll see you next time for episode 24 for LymphCast. Have a great day.